Shedeur Sanders started the season behind the curve, and by all accounts, he wasn't supposed to catch up. He came in raw, with barely any first-team snaps and expectations hovering near zero. When he finally hit the field, the growing pains were obvious. Missed reads, tough losses, and the pressure of leading an offense that wasn't built around him. But Sanders didn't flinch. Week by week, he learned. By season's end, he wasn't just keeping up. He was carrying momentum. If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed. Leading the Browns to back-to-back wins and earning serious consideration as their quarterback of the future. His growth mirrors the journey Cleveland is on. A team full of youth, developing through mistakes and learning how to win together. Sanders' emergence signals more than just a potential starter. It points to a culture shift. While Kevin Stefanski faces scrutiny and the front office weighs its next move, Sanders represents a bet that might already be paying off. Draft for character, build through youth, and let resilience do the rest. Shedeur Sanders walked into the season without the luxury most young quarterbacks get. No extended runway. No patience baked into the plan. He was a fifth-round pick, stepping into a crowded, uncertain quarterback room, trying to earn trust with limited reps, while everything around him felt unsettled. Training camp wasn't about comfort or momentum. It was about survival. Every snap mattered because there weren't many of them, and every mistake felt louder than it should have. Those early practices told the story before the games ever did. Sanders wasn't being handed anything. He was learning on the fly, adjusting to NFL speed, NFL pressure, and NFL expectations, while knowing the margin for error was thin. When reps are scarce, confidence becomes a choice. You either let doubt creep in, or you lock in and wait for your moment. Sanders chose the second option, even when the situation didn't reward it right away. What stood out wasn't just mechanics or arm talent. It was how he handled the grind. Staying present, staying prepared, staying connected to teammates who were going through their own growing pains. That mindset mattered later, even if it didn't show up on the stat sheet early. Because when the opportunity finally came, he didn't look like someone scrambling to catch up. He looked like someone who had been ready longer than anyone realized. When Sanders talked, it wasn't about excuses. He didn't point to limited reps or circumstances. He talked about learning, about growth, about understanding that rough stretches don't define you unless you let them. That kind of perspective doesn't always come naturally to rookies, especially ones thrown into unstable situations. But Sanders framed the season as a process, not a verdict. He acknowledged the mental side openly. The pressure, the frustration, the internal battles that come with struggling early and waiting for another chance. That honesty mattered because it lined up with what people were seeing. A quarterback who wasn't spiraling. A quarterback who wasn't shrinking. He leaned on teammates, leaned on preparation, and leaned into accountability. Those comments also reflected leadership, even before the results fully caught up. Leadership isn't always loud. Sometimes it's staying steady when things aren't going well. Sometimes it's choosing not to panic when outside noise starts getting louder. Sanders didn't promise instant success. He focused on stacking days, stacking lessons, and trusting that improvement would show up when it mattered most. The early game action wasn't smooth. The Bears' matchup reflected where both Sanders and the team were at that point in the season. There were struggles, missed opportunities, moments that reinforced how steep the learning curve really was. This wasn't a debut designed for highlight reels. It was raw, it was uncomfortable, and it was honest. That game put the challenges into focus. The offense wasn't clicking consistently. The team was young. Mistakes were costly. For a rookie quarterback trying to find footing, it could have been the kind of experience that shakes confidence. Instead, it became another data point, another lesson, another reminder that growth in the NFL rarely moves in a straight line. What mattered was how Sanders responded afterward. There was no visible retreat, no hesitation the next time he stepped on the field. The Bears' game didn't define him, but it shaped him. It reinforced the gap between where he was and where he needed to be, and it gave him a clearer picture of what improvement actually required. By the time the Bengals matchup arrived, The shift was noticeable. The season hadn't magically turned around, but Sanders looked different, more composed, more decisive. The game reflected the work that had been happening behind the scenes. This was where resilience started paying off. The Browns finished strong, and Sanders was a major part of that. 2 consecutive wins to close the season told a bigger story than just a box score. They showed progress. They showed belief. They showed a quarterback who had absorbed the early struggles and used them instead of being weighed down by them. That parallel between Sanders and the team couldn't be ignored. Both started rough. Both took their lumps. And both ended the season playing with more confidence and clarity. It wasn't about perfection. It was about trajectory. And by the end, that trajectory finally pointed upward. After the wins, Sanders didn't talk like someone who had arrived. He talked like someone who understood how much work was still ahead. He credited teammates. He talked about staying grounded. He talked about learning how to manage emotions across a long season. Those interviews reveal maturity. He understood the importance of celebrating progress without getting comfortable. He understood that confidence doesn't come from pretending struggles didn't happen, but from proving you can work through them. That balance is hard for young quarterbacks, especially ones who finish the season on a high note. He also emphasized togetherness, the support system, the locker room, the shared belief that improvement was possible even when results didn't immediately show it. That mindset matters for a young team trying to build something sustainable, not just survive a season. While Sanders was carving out his narrative, the coaching situation added another layer of tension. Kevin Stefanski's future became a topic of speculation, and it wasn't subtle. Questions about stability, direction, and potential changes hovered over everything. Stefanski addressed it directly, acknowledging reality without fueling the noise. Coaching uncertainty affects everyone, especially young quarterbacks. Continuity matters when you're learning the league, learning systems, and learning how to lead. Stefanski's comments reflected awareness of that responsibility, even as external pressure intensified. The situation underscored how fragile development can be in the NFL. One change can reset progress. One shift can alter confidence. That context made Sanders' steady growth even more significant, because it happened despite the uncertainty, not because conditions were ideal. The conversation with Mary Kay Cabot brought that uncertainty into sharper focus. Stefanski didn't dodge the reality of speculation, and the moment captured how quickly narratives can change in this league. Wins and losses don't just affect standings. They shape futures. This wasn't about drama for drama's sake. It was about acknowledging the stakes. For a young roster, especially a developing quarterback, coaching stability isn't just a luxury. It's a foundation. The questions surrounding Stefanski highlighted how much trust and patience matter during rebuilding phases. Those moments also reflected transparency. Stefanski didn't pretend everything was secure. He spoke within the reality of the NFL, where results and perception move fast, and where development sometimes competes with immediate expectations. Post-game, Stefanski shifted the focus back to growth. He talked about the team's youth, about learning through adversity, about finishing strong, and what that meant for the future. The message aligned closely with what Sanders had been saying all along. There was an emphasis on resilience, on staying connected, on recognizing progress even when the season as a whole didn't meet expectations. That alignment between coach and quarterback matters, especially when building culture. Even with questions lingering, the tone wasn't defeated. It was measured. It acknowledged the challenges while reinforcing belief in development and long-term vision. That balance mirrored the team's late-season performance. Taken together, Stefanski's season reflected the same arc as a team. Early frustration, mid-season turbulence, late-season clarity. The uncertainty around his future didn't erase the fact that growth was happening, particularly among younger players. For Sanders, that context mattered. Developing under pressure, without guaranteed stability, tested his mental resilience, and he passed that test. Not by being perfect, but by being consistent in approach and mindset. The bigger question moving forward wasn't just about coaching decisions. It was about protecting the progress that had been made. Development is fragile. Momentum matters. and both hinge on leadership at every level. The Browns season was a fairy tale, but it wasn't empty either. It was a season defined by learning curves, mental battles, and late-season proof that progress was real. Sanders embodied that journey, from limited reps and early struggles to finishing with confidence and belief. The back-to-back wins mattered because they validated the work. They gave the locker room something tangible to build on. They showed that patience, preparation, and resilience aren't abstract ideas. They translate to results when given time. As the offseason approaches, the focus shifts to what comes next. For Sanders, it's continued growth. For the team, it's stability and trust in the process. If you're watching this unfold, drop your thoughts below on where you think this goes next. Share this with someone following the Browns closely. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. Shedeur Sanders never asked for sympathy, and he didn't wait around for validation. He spoke with clarity throughout the season, owning the tough moments and pointing forward. There was no begging for praise or begging for patience. Just a quarterback who understood that leadership isn't always rewarded in real time, but it's always necessary. And when he talked about the adversity, it wasn't to make excuses. It was to show how he responded. Sanders leaned into growth like it was the only option. He addressed the limited reps without bitterness. He talked about pressure without crumbling under it. It wasn't just coach speak or pre-packaged media answers. There was authenticity behind every answer. He acknowledged how heavy things got mentally, the emotional toll, the hard days, the ones where doubt knocks at the door. And he made it clear that those were the exact days he decided not to fold. There's something powerful about that kind of self-awareness, especially when it comes from a rookie quarterback who hadn't been handed anything. Sanders made clear that his development wasn't an accident. It came from reflection, from persistence, and from constantly deciding to show up, even when the odds didn't care whether he did or not. The Bengals game didn't just mark the end of the season. It was the punctuation on a statement Sanders had been building toward all year. The pocket presence, the decision-making, the confidence his throws. It wasn't perfect, but it was night and day compared to the early season version of himself. And that's the point. In the NFL, improvement is the real currency. And what Sanders showed in those final games was enough to get people paying attention for the right reasons. Against the Bengals, he didn't look like someone hoping to survive. He looked like someone taking control, reading defenses faster, taking shots when they were there, extending plays not out of desperation, but because he trusted what he was seeing. The win didn't just mean the Browns ended the season on a high. It meant the locker room had something to believe in, not just for next season, but for the future. And it meant Sanders had something tangible to stand on. He didn't have to sell hope. He had the film to back it up. He earned respect not because he demanded it, but because he proved he could lead when it counted. Kevin Stefanski saw it all unfold from the sideline, a young quarterback grinding through a turbulent season, finding his voice and showing exactly why he belonged. But at the same time, Stefanski had to balance his own chaos, coaching a developing team under a microscope, with his own job security in question. His public comments throughout the season walked a tightrope, praising growth without overhyping, owning missteps without inviting more scrutiny. And as the pressure mounted, Stefanski stayed focused on what he could control. His tone never really shifted. Even as the noise got louder, he knew the stakes. And he knew the questions weren't going away. Stefanski didn't promise fans a playoff run. He talked about culture, about development, about building the right way. And even if some didn't want to hear that in the middle of losses, it's exactly what a young team like the Browns needed to hear, especially with a rookie quarterback in the spotlight. Stefanski wasn't perfect, but he provided something you can't teach: consistency when things get chaotic. After the final game, Sanders stood in front of the mic and sounded like someone who had been through something real. He didn't downplay the adversity. He didn't sugarcoat the mental toll. He said the quiet part out loud. This season tested him in ways he wasn't ready for, and he came out stronger. There was no forced celebration. No pretending that 2 wins at the end erased the early pain. But there was pride, and there should have been. Sanders fought for every snap, every yard, every ounce of progress. And more importantly, He grew as a leader because that's what the job demands. Not just being the guy when things go right, but being the steady voice when nothing seems to work. The post-game interviews weren't just media obligations. They were glimpses into how Sanders processed a journey. And what came through was gratitude for the teammates who had his back, for the coaches who trusted him enough to keep going, for the chance to fight through it all and still finish standing. That's what leadership looks like on the other side of chaos. Stefanski's last post-game appearance of the season had a very different weight to it, not just because of the speculation around his job, but because of everything the team had endured. He acknowledged the fight, the progress, the moments that didn't show up on stat sheets but mattered just as much. He talked about Sanders with visible respect, not just as a player, but as a competitor, the kind of guy who didn't flinch when most rookies would have cracked. Stefanski didn't get sentimental, but the message was clear. He saw what Sanders had become, and he saw what it took for him to get there. The coach wasn't asking for sympathy either. He understood the business. He knew the narrative could flip in a heartbeat. But in that moment, he emphasized what was real. This group had grown, and they'd done it the hard way. Whatever happens next, Stefanski made sure the message ended with a sense of pride and a focus on the long game. The full arc of Stefanski's year was about one game, or even one quarterback. It was about trying to steer a young team through injuries, inconsistency, and questions that never stopped coming. His biggest critics pointed to the record. His defenders pointed to the context. But the reality sat somewhere in between. He wasn't coaching a veteran roster built to contend. He was trying to stabilize a team, still figuring out who they were. That matters. And while not every call was perfect, not every game plan flawless, Stefanski never lost a locker room. That counts for something, especially when your rookie quarterback finishes strong. Not because the system finally made sense, but because the belief never wavered. Stefanski's future may still be in question, but the structure he built helped shape the very resilience the Browns showed down the stretch. And that doesn't disappear, no matter what happens next. The media narrative had its own evolution, too. Mary Kay Cabot's coverage followed every turn. Sanders' bumpy start. Stefanski's job speculation. The team's string of growing pains. It was all under microscope. And the tension wasn't manufactured. It reflected a fan base desperate for direction, clarity, and hope. Cabot's reports added weight to the coaching rumors. Bill Belichick's name surfaced more than once, and it wasn't just for clicks. It was a real possibility, and that alone shifted the energy around Stefanski. One rough game, one locker room slip, one decision taken the wrong way. It all had the power to tip the scale. And yet, in the final weeks, the tone shifted. It wasn't about Stefanski clinging to his job or Sanders clawing for respect. It was about results, growth, the kind of substance that couldn't be ignored. And by the end, Cabot's reporting reflected that. It acknowledged the steps forward while still recognizing the uncertainty ahead. The Browns didn't win the division. They didn't make the playoffs. But this season mattered, and not just for headline reasons. It was a test of patience, development, and the mental fortitude it takes to grow through setbacks. The final stretch, the 2 wins that closed out the schedule, offered more than momentum. They offered proof. Proof that Sanders can lead. Proof that the roster, young as it is, can respond when it matters. Proof that the team, for all its flaws, has a foundation worth building on. And that's rare, because a lot of teams go through rebuilding years and come out with nothing to show for it. The Browns came out with a potential quarterback of the future and a locker room that didn't quit. The next chapter will hinge on decisions about coaching, about personnel, about direction, but it won't be starting from zero. And that's because of the work put in when the season could have easily fallen apart. Those match photos won't show every detail, but they'll show a team that finished together. And that's not something every franchise can say. Back at practice, even as the season wound down, Sanders never changed his approach. Same effort, same preparation. He wasn't acting like the job was locked up. He was still fighting for every inch. And that attitude echoed through the locker room. Teammates noticed. Coaches noticed. That quiet work ethic, the commitment to detail, it made an impression. You don't need a captain patch to lead. You need consistency, accountability. And Sanders brought that before the cameras ever did. He may not have had the hype other rookies came in with, but he's leaving the season with something more valuable: belief. Not just from fans or media, but from the people in that building. That kind of respect isn't gifted. It's earned one day at a time. Shedeur, the Bears game still stands as a bookmark. Proof of how far Sanders had to come. Every misread, every mistimed throw, every frustrated glance on the sideline. But looking back, that game didn't break him. It built him. Because adversity doesn't always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it shows up in silent failures. And how you respond to those defines the rest of your story. Sanders didn't need to erase that performance. He just needed to grow from it. And he did. When Shedeur Sanders spoke about the mental weight of his rookie season, it didn't feel like a PR statement. It felt like a window into how tough the NFL transition really is. This wasn't just about learning a new playbook. It was about navigating pressure, judgment, and expectations that shifted by the week. But he never framed it as a burden. He framed it as part of the job. He made it clear. Football is just as much a mental game as it is physical. And the biggest leap from college to the league isn't always about arm strength or footwork. It's about mindset, handling losses, blocking out noise, staying committed when the situation doesn't cater to your confidence. That's where Sanders showed maturity beyond his years. He never let the lows define him, even when they were loud. Kevin Stefanski echoed that same mental resilience when talking about his team. He didn't pretend things went smoothly, but he was always careful to highlight the effort, the growth, the weeks where the progress wasn't visible yet, but still happening. It wasn't spin, it was survival. Because for a young coach on a hot seat, holding the locker room together is sometimes the biggest win of all. He pointed to the mental toughness the team showed in the final weeks, not just in Sanders, but across the roster. That kind of grit doesn't come from a good week of practice. It builds over months of being doubted. And while wins matter, Stefanski made it clear that mindset is what will carry this team forward. That's what makes Stefanski's season so complicated. The record doesn't scream success. The headlines haven't been kind. But underneath the surface, he managed to guide a young, inexperienced team through turbulence, and they didn't splinter. That says something. Maybe not enough for everyone, but enough for those watching closely. He coached a quarterback from struggling backup to potential franchise leader. He kept a young locker room aligned during the kind of season that typically leads to finger-pointing. If this ends up being his final year, it won't be a failure. It'll be a foundational chapter for whoever steps in next. The final weeks of the season brought a different energy, not just because of wins, but because of belief. The Browns played like a team that finally saw what they could be. That doesn't erase the early mistakes or the slow starts, but reframes them. This wasn't a lost season. It was a season of discovery. Sanders found his rhythm. Stefanski found some validation. And the fans? They finally saw glimpses of something worth investing in. Whether it's Stefanski at the helm or someone new, the blueprint is there. Now it's about consistency and patience. The hardest things to sell, but the only path to something real. When Sanders stepped to the mic that last time, he didn't promise anything bold. He just talked about work, staying the course, trusting what got him through the dark stretches. That quiet confidence hits harder than any flashy quote, because we've seen the alternative, and this feels different. If you're still here, you're probably just as locked in as the team is. Tap that like button if you see the vision. Drop a comment if you believe the turnaround is real. And make sure you're subscribed, because the next chapter might be the one where it all clicks.